Welcome.
All right. So our first live Q&A for the Pillars of Fitness Challenge.
Yep.
So in theory, we are about halfway through the challenge. We've got the first 2 days under our belt. And the first day we talked about mobility and stability.
Yep.
And then the second day, we talked about strength and more stability type of things.
Right.
And so we offered some questions, and we've got a couple good questions. And so if you're new to this, and if you don't know what we're doing a 5-day challenge, and it's the 5 pillars of fitness. And the idea is especially geared towards the older adult. Elizabeth and I are both in our early 50s. And so what we found through our clinical practice, we're both physical therapists, is that many people don't have the full scope of their fitness routine. Right. And so we talked about making sure that your fitness routine had all 5 components. So that would be a strength component, a flexibility and mobility component, power component, balance, and then we also talked about cardiorespiratory.
Right.
And too many times we are very linear with our movements, especially, most of us over 50. I mean, I still play a little bit of basketball, but most of us over 50 aren't doing a lot of side-to-side rotational type of things. I mean, there's pickleball and tennis, but for the most part, our strengthening things tend to be really linear. Walking, jogging, things like that, all in a straight line. Our weightlifting tends to be in a straight line. So, hey guys, thanks for the challenge. I'm learning a lot and I love your channel. Thank you, Toby. Thank you very much. I do have a question about stretching. I have chronic lower back pain, usually only on the right side. I stretch almost daily, but I'm just as tight the next day. Thanks for any ideas that you guys might have, Toby. All right, so a couple things with that. Oftentimes, and if Toby was here, if you're watching, maybe let us know. But I'd be curious to see how long Toby is holding that stretch for.
Yes.
Because he might have to hold that stretch a little bit longer. Just say, for example, if I had a finger injury and I had surgery and there's some scar tissue here, and if I'm working on mobility through there, and if I just hold it for about a 10-second count, maybe 15-second count, and then release it, I'm going to stretch it out in the moment, but I'm not going to make any lasting changes in that muscle unless I hold it for a little bit longer, because there's different tissues that we're after.
Right.
We've got the contractile tissue, but we also have got connective tissue, right?
Yeah. The contractile tissue is like your muscles. And then the other soft tissue, the tissue that surrounds the joint, the tissue that surrounds the muscle, really, really important to address that as well. And when we do a shorter stretch, you're not necessarily going to make lasting changes and actually change the length of what we call let's call it just miscellaneous soft tissue. But a lot of times you'll hear it called fascia. And you might even hear about ligaments and joint capsules and things like that. And so the thing about stretching, prolonged stretching, is a really good thing to do. What happens with that? Let's say in the finger exercise that you held that and held it and held it and held it. So you're getting beyond any kind of contractile tissue, and you're getting more into the soft tissue, the fascia, the joint, ligaments, and maybe even, the tendinous insertions of the muscle. And so many times it's not just about this stretching the short contractile tissue. It's about stretching this other fascia. And when we're talking about elongating that for long-term gains, you've got to do it for minutes. So now this isn't like a super functional example, but let's say you have a tight back. And, it's tight and you're like, oh, I just feel like I want to stretch and I just want to roll myself forward. So if you know something like child's pose in yoga, so you're down and you're just kind of stretching your whole back out. If you were to do that and you wanted to get beyond stretching the contractile tissue, the muscles, you would have to hold that somewhere between 3 and 5 minutes. And that's actually a thing. It's a really good methodology to do. So in Toby's case, we have so many more questions, right? But think about that. If you're not making those gains, sometimes we can only make so many gains if we're just identifying and targeting the contractile tissue. We need to really change and elongate the tissue. And what happens over time when you hold it is called, it's called creep. And I know that's kind of a funky name, but that's actually what it's called.
Sure.
And that tissue just lengthens and lengthens. I mean, think like a rubber band. Like if you put a rubber band on two pegs for a prolonged period of time, it would actually change lengths and it would not go back, even though,
yeah,
you
that's
know,
a great analogy.
So that's creep. And you'd be like, oh yeah, or think about like wet clothes on, drying wet clothes on a hanger or something, and how it just drapes it down. That's kind of like creep. And we want that to happen in the tissues that need it. And so you can do that in many different ways. So that would be my guess, our guess, on what's going on with Toby. So implementing longer, prolonged stretches where we're going to get that creep effect.
Like literally 3 to 5 minutes just to kind of stay in that. And I think, stretching is this huge umbrella. And it could be a dynamic stretch, which could just be something as simple as this, or I could be holding the stretch for 10, 15 seconds. But I think you bring up a really good point. So if we want to loosen up in the moment, then I don't think we need to hold the stretch quite as long. Right. Or if we're happy with the length and maybe it's just a little tight, then I don't think it takes as long. You can literally almost kind of feel a release or a lengthening of the muscle.
Yeah.
But if it's chronically tight, and you want to actually make more of a lasting change so that you come back tomorrow, it's actually a little bit more flexible. I do think you need to hold it a little bit longer. Yeah. Another thing that I will say too is that sometimes if you can do a little bit of trigger point work in the area also. Now it depends upon what area we're talking about too. Like I had a client of mine that took playing basketball, and they took a knee right in the thigh. Boom, right there. And so they had the hardest time bending up their knee because they were so tight. They were so tight through the quads. And so obviously in that situation there, the contractile tissue, the fascial system, it was swollen. Everything was pretty tight through there. It wasn't so much the joint because we pretty much knew it was in the soft tissue. But what I had him do once the acute pain subsided, and it was really tender. So he literally just had to get a dowel first. So we couldn't even do the foam roller because laying prone and doing a plank type of position on that was just too much. But as he started to kind of loosen that up just a little bit first, and then he was able to go along to that prolonged stretch, we were slowly able to make some gains in that.
And in that case, fascia surrounds the muscle. So you have the muscle, the contractile tissue you're dealing with the fascia that surrounds it. You can, in this case, you're addressing both of them, but the contractile tissue is not really going to respond after 30 seconds.
Correct.
It is the fascia that is going to respond, which is what we want. And in this case, it's like we're trying to help the healing process with that as well.
So bottom line is that if you want something, if something is tight and you keep coming back to it and it's just as tight as it was yesterday, before you abandon stretching and say that it's not working, you need to hold it longer. 3 to 5 minutes if possible. If you can, do a little bit of trigger point work, whether it's a machine, whether it's a massage gun, whether it's a lacrosse ball, if it's appropriate based upon what you're trying to stretch. And that will also facilitate the stretch.
Right.
All right,
and just be and be looking on our channel, because we are going to be doing more videos on things like that. There's a specialty of a type of yoga. It's called yin yoga. You can look for yin yoga. And that is prolonged stretching for the effective creep. And that will be really, really helpful. But also keep looking here back at our channel. We'll be putting videos about that on here as well.
All right, Toby. And if you end up watching this, let us know if it helped. Maybe all it could just be something as simple as holding it a little bit longer.